Hello and welcome to Talking Books. I'm Jill de Villiers. Nearly 2 decades after Nelson Mandela had wanted him to become South Africa's president, Cyril Ramaphosa took office. But by the time this happened, South Africa was caught in a web of state capture, corruption, poverty and despair. Joining me now is writer and political commentator Ralph Mathekga, who discusses his book, Ramaphosa's Turn, Can Cyril Save South Africa? Ralph, thank you so much for coming in and chatting to us about this. I would like to start with your statement that you make that Ramaphosa can't lead us to a land of milk and honey, but that he can manage us from crisis to crisis. Can you tell me a little bit more about your thought behind that?
Well, you know, if you look at what has happened in South Africa in the last 7-8 years under President Jacob Zuma's administration, it's become very clear to us now as we speak that corruption got very systemic, it got very entrenched, and you have the public sector that has lost its capacity because of the extent of corruption. Look where the economy is. So you won't easily come out of that by a magic wand. You really need someone who can shepherd the country gradually out of that crisis. If you try to push for major reforms within the shortest space of time, you are going to strain the system, and you might end up with a mutiny, you might end up with resistance here and there when he's trying to undertake this anti-corruption maneuver within government. So it's going to have to be a gradual step by step out of this crisis. I mean, he has to work on the party first, that is the ANC, to make sure that the ANC is well aligned towards his agenda of clean government, of you know, reclaiming the capacity of state institutions, freeing them away from state capture. And after then, he has to sell the dream to the broader nation. He has got to unite us as a nation. We are the most divided now. So all of this point to, I think, a very long process. And I think we are at a crisis point. We just need someone to help us to get out of that gradually.
Now, people at the end of when he got elected, people were thinking the Ramaphosa came in, and people thought now everything is going to change immediately, and we're going to see drastic changes. But he came into a system that is actually very complex within the ANC itself. So how does that work? Because his leadership style is also very different from the ANC's leadership style, yet he is playing within it. Can we talk a little bit about that?
I mean, the main constraint he is confronted with within the ANC is to try to return the party to what I call a common, maybe consensus type of leadership, where you don't actually prescribe to people what they need, but you get them around the table to ensure that they engage in a conversation to find what they need. And what we've seen within the ANC recently, in my view, the ANC has shifted more towards majoritarian politics. I mean, you look at the framing of the land issue, it's expropriation without compensation. It's an absolutist position which comes out of genuine frustrations with policy. But I think that what Ramaphosa can do is to say to the ANC that the validity of any economic policy intervention, it's not solely on the basis of the fact that it's supported by majority. It is also about how other groups within the country can share into that. You need to move towards that consensus. It's going to be a shift in terms of tradition within the ANC. Recently, the ANC had never had to bargain when it comes to policy position. Now it's being challenged in court successfully and so forth, because the court is saying that fine, you've got majority, you've got executive prerogative, but you cannot implement policy arbitrarily. We've seen on affirmative action and so forth. So you need someone who's going to say that let's go back and try the consensus approach. And this is very difficult because in most cases where countries are battling with high unemployment, divisive social problems such as crime, as we have, it becomes very difficult to say to people, let's get nuances in policy. People want immediate solution. They want radical approach. And I think that people will have to understand that it's not his leadership style. He's an incrementalist. He's not a radical kind of, he does not pursue a radical approach to leadership.
Now, where does he get this leadership? You describe in the book that his way towards politics has been very different to other leaders. And instead of being more in a liberation movement, although part of the ANC, he went through the UDF and learned the concessions over there. And tell me a little bit about that and how that influenced his leadership style, in your opinion.
You know, quite often in South Africa, when we look at Ramaphosa, the person, mostly people will look at his maybe recent, the sector that he has recently interacted with, which happens to be the private sector. And then they say that no, he's always pro-business. For him it's very clear, it's about profit and so forth. And then I think that is factually incorrect, because if you look at the totality of how his leadership evolved, this is the person who was part of a student movement during the time of Steve Biko. It doesn't get more radical than that. And at the same time, he's been credited for formation of COSATU, one of the most robust trade unions in the country. And COSATU has played a bigger role in being an anchor for the UDF as well, the social movement in South Africa in pushing against apartheid. He's been part of that. But if you look at that leadership, it is not the leadership that comes through party hierarchy. It distinctly lacks that party hierarchy you see within the ANC, where it is believed that you know, leadership and wisdom have to come through that. The social movement, the civil society movement in South Africa are usually democratic in their nature, consultative in their nature. That is why I think it creates an opportunity for that consultative leadership. But yet, the irony is that South Africans are very frustrated with that. They want a sledgehammer approach. They want someone who's going to say that, look, this person is facing allegations. We don't have to wait for due process. Let's jail them. And that is the absolutist leadership that I think Ramaphosa does not believe in.
But also cannot deliver at this stage.
It is difficult because in a moment of crisis, I mean, if you look across the world, you look at Germany, you look at Italy, even in the period leading to the Second World War, economic crises are the ones that actually create conditions for absolute leaders, for dictatorship. Those crises, sometimes people unite around that, willing to forsake some of their civil liberties. That's how most of the nations have experienced this. And I think in the case of South Africa, you always have a risk for that, where people are saying that, but we want you to deliver tomorrow, stop consulting, show a sense of urgency, you are in charge, and so forth, forgetting that we're actually creating conditions for dictatorship. And I think that one thing about Ramaphosa, he has not been baited by that frustration that we have, but also the reality within the ANC is that his power base is not so solid that he can actually entertain going it alone, if you like. He needs to negotiate with allies and with detractors, with civil society organization, with the business community. It is the first time that actually the legitimacy of the ANC leadership depends on the extent to which it reaches out to all these other sectors and social players within the society.
Now let's talk about the Premier League, who he is up against, and how can he deal with that?
The Premier League is evolving. I mean, originally we have thought about the Premier League as involving Mpumalanga, former Premier, that is David Mabuza, Free State, former Premier, currently the Secretary General of the ANC, Magashule, and also Northwest Premier, currently out of the provincial structure. I mean, that's how we have thought about it when they went into Nasrec. But something strange happened in Nasrec, where Mabuza is now part of the top 6. And I don't think his political objectives can perfectly align with that of the Premier League now. The Premier League now, some of them are facing investigation relating to state capture, the Estina Dairy Farm investigation in Northwest. And for some reason, Mabuza is not facing any of investigation. So they're becoming a liability for his political prospects. And that is why he's aligned himself now with Mr. Ramaphosa. Now you have Magashule, of course. You have got a Northwest Premier who openly are being reported upon as people who are dissatisfied with the leadership of Ramaphosa, people who are staging a mutiny. But I do think that they need to survive by Mabuza and also Mr. Ramaphosa. Maybe it can create conditions for his survival. But people should not be naive. He's surviving also because he's being supported by Mr. Mabuza, not because he has got a strong power base within the ANC. He's built in that, I think.
And this mutiny, do you think he has a chance to survive it?
I think he will. I think that there is awareness within the ANC. Even those, his detractors, they're being careful because there's an awareness that if they are seen to just be whimsically trying to remove him without any basis, without any principle, South Africans are not going to actually associate themselves with the ANC that doesn't have Ramaphosa now, especially the one who would have been removed by people with credibility problems. There is that awareness. And I don't think that he's anchoring his presidency much across the nation, outside the ANC. And that is what I think will help him to survive, because had it not been for this support he enjoys outside the ANC, that support is the one that is making him even attractive to the ANC, because within the ANC, even those who don't like him, they are aware that you go to the elections without him, you're going to be decimated there. It's a big risk that I don't think you know, they are willing to take. So it's a balancing act.
Okay, you say that it would be decimated in the election if going without him.
Yes.
Do you think we stand at the? Do you think the ANC stands a good chance to win the election with him?
I think they stand a good chance to stabilize the losses. I mean, I start off from the base that the ANC has been through a crisis under President Jacob Zuma. It's still experiencing a crisis. The point is not how you turn that around and make great fortune out of that crisis. For me, it's about the basics of arresting the descent of the ANC. It's about whether Ramaphosa can instill a sense of integrity within the ANC, get South Africans to be more forgiving and to look in the direction of the ANC, just to stop further decline of the ANC. And from that point of view, I think that they will be able to do better. I mean, 55%, 56%, that will still be reasonable for the ANC, given what they've been involved in the past few years. So
in the meantime, we can't expect any sort of major drastic things, even in the land reform. Is it more a question of gancane?
Yeah, it's picky. You know, you manage it, you move gradually, you try not to rock the boat, but you also give an indication that you are doing something. There is a movement, but yet I'm not going to nail my colors to the mast at this point, because it's too risky. No one wants to go into the elections with this level of uncertainty. So I think that you manage the situation. You look at the positives, that fine, as the president I can stand and say I'm working on the economy. I can call a job summit, I can address a job summit, I can talk to the international community, I can make sure that the rating agencies keep us stable, but they do not further downgrade us. Those are things that you can actually go into the election with and still survive. If you're becoming too experimental, it can become disastrous.
Ralph, thank you so much for coming in and chatting to us.
Thank you so much.
So this is really an excellent book, and I recommend it very highly. My guest is Ralph Mathekga, and his book is Ramaphosa's Turn, Can Cyril Save South Africa? And that is it for this edition of Talking Books. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.